teaching early writing. In this lesson, we are going to explore 3 ways to teach early writing. First of all, through shared writing, through use of a writing center in the early childhood classroom, and through interactive writing. The first way of teaching early writing that we're going to talk about is that of shared writing. And shared writing is one of the best ways to introduce young children to the writing process. Shared writing is also known as the language experience approach. Simply put, shared writing occurs when the teacher and child or children work together to write some text. The basic strategy of shared writing is as follows. First, the children tell or dictate a story. Second, the teacher writes it down while the children watch. Then the teacher reads the story, modeling good intonation. And finally, the children read the story as a group and then individually. Of course, there are variations of this process depending on the needs of your students. Through shared writing, children get to watch while the teacher models how writing and how oral reading works. There are many opportunities for the teacher to teach concepts about print and writing. The teacher can model concepts of print such as printing left to right and reading from top to bottom. The teacher can point out spaces between words to help children establish word boundaries. And of course, every shared writing experience is a phonics lesson. Other writing skills such as capitalization, punctuation, and quotation marks could be introduced, and children begin to understand linguistic terminology such as letter, word, uppercase, and so on. With individual experience stories, there's one more big advantage. There is a perfect match between what the children have experienced, the language used to describe those experiences, and how those words map to print. This makes the story very predictable, interesting, and easy for the children to read. Children begin to make those important connections between what they can say and what it looks like in print. Now, we're going to look at 3 examples of shared writing strategy. The first example is called the Big Scrapbook. This is a shared writing strategy used in the early literacy curriculum Doors to Discovery, which was published by McGraw-Hill. It's a highly structured strategy that's appropriate for beginning readers and writers who are 3 or 4 years old. The strategy uses sentence frames and blank big books. Here are some examples of 2 big scrapbooks from the ACE Early Reading First project in San Luis in Somerton, Arizona. The children are engaged in a unit on transportation. They've just been read an informational book about cars. Then the teacher uses a sentence frame, blank knows that cars have blank, so that children can dictate what they know about the parts of cars. Here's the cover of the scrapbook, made in Edgar Martinez and Lupita Altamirano's preschool class, The Room. Here is an example of a page from the big scrapbook. Brian dictated that he knows that cars have gas tanks. Nadni knows that cars have doors. The children can then read the book as a group, with a partner, and then individually. Here's an example from Brenda's Head Start classroom. The class was engaged in a unit on building and construction. They had just taken a field trip around the neighborhood. Brenda took photos of buildings and discussed with the children what kind of materials the buildings were made of. When the children got back to the classroom, Brenda led them in a shared writing experience. They used the sentence frame, blank is made of blank. Well, one of the children dictated that our school is made of stucco. Another child dictated that the police station is made of bricks. Once these big scrapbooks are completed, they can be put into the class library. These kind of child-authored texts are always among the most favorite popular texts in the library. A second kind of shared writing experience is known as a group experience story. Here, the classes had some kind of collective shared experience. They could do a shared reading of a book, take a field trip, or have some other type of meaningful experience, like baby gerbils being born. The key is that the experience is shared by all the members of the group so they can contribute to the story. After the group experience, the children tell the story and the teacher takes dictation. We recommend at the preschool level that the teacher read every word as it is written and then reread each sentence after it has been written. If a child's contribution is unclear, the teacher can then do some minor editing. We want the story to be understandable by the whole group. After the story is completed, the teacher rereads the story from the beginning to the end, emphasizing concepts of print, such as left to right, top to bottom, book handling skills, and how authors write stories. Then, it's the children's turn to read the story. This is usually done a number of times. Initially, all the children read it together as a group, which is a variation of choral reading. Then you could ask individual children to come up, perhaps to identify letters or to find sight words or to read a sentence that they can read. Then that book can be added to the classroom library. Often teachers will use a children's picture book as the basis of a shared writing activity. Brown Bear is an early childhood classic which is often transformed into a class book. Here is an example of an October activity that children can read after creating their own illustrations. The children generated things that they saw in the month of October to follow the pattern of the story, so it became black cat, what do you see? I see an orange pumpkin looking at me. Orange pumpkin, what do you see? And so on. Our third shared writing strategy is known as the individual experience story. Here, children meet one-on-one with the teacher and dictate their own story. As the child dictates, the teacher writes it down as the child watches. This often happens after a child has drawn a picture. The teacher will say, "Tell me about your picture," and write down the child's words. Shared writing has one more really important advantage. The text is based directly on children's oral language and experience. As a result, the story is very meaningful, it's very predictable, it's very easy for the children to read. So this is a good way to get children off to a start with oral reading, and they begin to conceive of themselves as writers and readers. It is important to help parents understand this process. Copies of shared writing can go home so the child can read to his or her own family. Now let's take a look at writing centers. Just as it is very important to have a library center in the classroom, an area that's dedicated to books and reading, children need a writing center dedicated to writing and illustrating. Research has shown that when writing centers are available, children do lots of writing. Here's an example of a writing center from the ACE Early Reading First project. Notice that it contains a number of different types of writing instruments. There are pencils and pens and markers. There are also a number of different things to write on. Different types of paper, several types of blank books, and so on. The Writing Center also displays examples of children's writing, a poster that encourages writing, and a mailbox to encourage make-believe dramatic play. Here's another example of a writing center from the ACE project. This center has two parts. Here we see a table with many instruments to write, and you'll also notice that there's a word game, words on key rings, and books in this writing center. The writing center also has each child's name on a sentence strip over there to the left because children love to write about their friends. Then, in the back of the table area is a shelf that contains many different materials for children to write on. Sometimes, just changing the materials in the writing center to reflect holidays or other celebrations brings a renewed interest to the writing center. Writing centers should contain at least 2 chairs so the children can work together and learn from each other as they write. Talking about what to write is very important. Finally, here is an example of what one might call a mini writing center. It is a Lazy Susan with many different instruments to write with and ways to illustrate. This teacher has a regular writing center like the ones we just saw, but she also has several of these Lazy Susans in other centers such as the Art Center, the Science Center, and the Math Center. This encourages children to write across the curriculum. Our third strategy is called interactive writing. Here the teacher and the child engage in a written conversation. The child writes something, the teacher responds, the child responds back, and this keeps going. In the primary grades, this strategy is known as dialogue journaling. Interactive writing also provides a real purpose for children to write. They are writing to communicate with their teacher. It's also a good way for the teacher to get to know the children in the classroom. Teachers have that excellent opportunity to model conventional spelling for children. If the children use inventive spelling in their piece, the teacher can model conventional spelling in their reply. Interactive writing works easily at the primary grade level. The children and the teacher are each able to read what the other has written. This often isn't the case at the preschool level. The teacher may not be able to decipher the child's attempt at emergent writing, and the child probably won't be able to read the teacher's journal response. This necessitates having journal conferences. The children bring their journals up to the teacher, and they each read their own entries. Nigel Hall, who's a senior lecturer at Manchester Polytechnic in England, has come up with a form of interactive writing that is well suited for preschool children. It is called the message sheet. Here, the teacher makes a comment about a personal experience on a large sheet of chart paper. The children are then invited to write comments on the paper throughout the day. At the end of the day, the teacher reads their comments to the class. Here's an example. The teacher started with a message sheet by writing, "I did not want to get out of bed this morning. It was too cold." She reads this to the class, and throughout the day, the children have the chance to write their comments underneath her statement. Here are 3 examples about what the children wrote about their own experiences with getting out of bed. One wrote, "I didn't want to get out of bed today either, but I made myself get up." A second wrote, I like lying in bed. And the third wrote, my mum woke me up and I didn't like it. It was too warm. Next, we'll see an example of a dialogue journal by a kindergartner named Sean. These examples are taken from a book called The Craft of Writing by Judith Newman. Here is one of Sean's first journal entries from September. He has written, Tony has a new truck. The teacher responds in writing, Tony got the truck for his birthday, didn't he, Sean? Do you know when your birthday is? Is it coming soon? Notice that Sean's entry is very short and most of the words are spelt conventionally. This shows that Sean is limiting himself to words that he already knows how to spell. In this entry from October, Sean has made a big step forward. Now he has begun to use inventive spelling so that he can write longer entries in his journal. He writes, My father caught a partridge. He found it in a greenhouse. The teacher responds in writing, What did your father do with the partridge he caught in the greenhouse? Sean responds, We let it go. In this entry from February, you can see that Sean's responses have become longer and more complex. His invented spelling has become easier to read as well. Here's my best guess at what Sean was writing. Before I went to school, I made 4 big snowballs to make a snowman, and I hope the snow doesn't melt so I can have my snowman. The teacher responded in writing, I hope your snowman doesn't melt either, Sean. What will you do if it does melt? Sean replies, I will build another. By May, Sean's inventive spelling is becoming very advanced. The teacher can read this on her own. Here's Sean's entry. I went fishing last night and I caught a fish and we almost caught another fish, but it got away. I brought my rabbit to school and he is nervous. The end. The teacher responds, What kind of fish did you catch, Sean? And Sean replies, A trout. By June, Sean's writing is approaching conventional. He writes, Me and my dad are going fishing tonight, and we are staying until 9 o'clock, and I am going to fish, and then I will go home. The teacher replies, I hope you catch some more fish tonight, Sean. Will you eat them if you do? Sean replies, Yes. The next portion of this lesson will introduce you to Writer's Workshop.